At our anniversary dinner, I stepped away to use the restroom and happened to overhear my wife saying, Preview. At our 20th anniversary dinner, I stepped away to use the restroom and overheard my wife talking to her brother on the phone. I've already moved most of his inheritance into accounts he can't access. Once the house sells next month, I'm filing for divorce and taking the kids to California. We had just renewed our vows that morning. I returned to the table, ordered champagne, and said nothing. Life is strange. One moment, you're celebrating 20 years with the love of your life, and the next, you're watching that same person unravel every promise they've ever made. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. Before the betrayal, before the secrets, before my world split open like a fault line. My name is Elliot Grayson, and up until recently, I thought I had a good life. Not perfect, but good. I was married to Lillian, my high school sweetheart, for 2 decades. We had 2 kids, Asher, 17, and Sophia, 14, who were the center of my universe. We weren't millionaires, but we were comfortable. I owned a mid-sized construction company that kept food on the table and a roof over our heads. Lillian worked part-time as a freelance interior designer, mostly for wealthy clients who wanted their homes to look like magazine spreads. Our house, a sprawling colonial on the outskirts of Hartford, Connecticut, had been in my family for 3 generations. It was my inheritance, the home my grandfather built with his own hands. After my parents passed, my father from a heart attack last year, my mother from cancer a few months ago, I became the last Grayson standing. The house, the land, the money they left behind, it was all meant to be for my family, for Asher and Sophia's future. Lillian and I had been through our rough patches, of course. Marriage isn't a fairy tale, but we'd always found our way back to each other, until now. When Lillian suggested we renew our vows for our 20th anniversary, I was surprised. Things had been tense between us since my mother's death. She'd never been close to my mom, never liked the way my parents hovered over our lives, as she put it. But I figured maybe this was her way of making amends. She planned everything. A small ceremony in her parents' backyard, nothing extravagant, just close family and a few friends. She wore a simple ivory dress, her auburn hair cascading in soft curls. I remember looking at her as we stood under that flower-covered arch, thinking, this is the woman I built my life with. This is home. Asher stood next to me, trying not to look bored. Sophia fidgeted with her bracelet, probably wishing she was anywhere else. And Lillian, she smiled at me with the same warm expression she'd had on our wedding day, but it was all a lie. I just didn't know it yet. The morning of our anniversary, Lillian did something unusual. She brought me coffee in bed. Now, that might not sound like much, but in 20 years she had never done that. Lillian wasn't the doting wife type. She was affectionate, sure, but grand gestures weren't her thing. You deserve to be pampered today, she said, kissing my forehead. I should have known something was off. The day went by in a blur. The ceremony, the lunch with her family, and then a few hours to relax before our dinner reservation at Sorella's, an upscale Italian place downtown that Lillian had been dying to try. She was on her phone a lot that afternoon. I caught her smiling at a text, a secret little smirk she quickly wiped away when she saw me watching. Who's that? I asked casually. Just finalizing some surprise details, she said with a laugh, tucking her phone away. I let it go. After all, it was our anniversary. What could she possibly be hiding? That night, we arrived at the restaurant, a candlelit table waiting for us. Lillian was in a particularly affectionate mood, touching my arm, laughing at my dumb jokes, toasting to forever. The waiter even brought us complimentary Prosecco for our celebration. Looking at her across the table, I thought, maybe things are finally getting better. I was dead wrong. Halfway through dinner, I excused myself to use the restroom. The hallway leading there was dimly lit, the murmur of conversations and clinking glasses fading behind me. Just as I turned the corner, I spotted Lillian, her back to me, her phone pressed against her ear. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. But then I heard my name, and what she said next froze me in place. I've already transferred most of Elliot's inheritance into accounts he can't access, she whispered. Once the house is sold next month, I'm filing for divorce and taking the kids to California. I gripped the wall to steady myself. My ears were ringing. I felt like I had just stepped into some alternate reality where my wife, the woman who had just renewed her vows with me that morning, was plotting to strip me of everything. The betrayal was a physical thing, wrapping around my chest like a vice. Yes, I know it's been the plan all along, she continued, her voice sharp. He's too wrapped up in grieving his mother to see what's happening. The real estate agent already has multiple offers. We just have to keep playing nice for a little longer. My stomach turned. Our house? Our home? She kept talking. Asher will be stubborn at first, but he'll come around. And Sophia adores me. She'll follow wherever I go. Elliot's barely around anyway. He's either working or he was with his mother at that depressing hospice. My fists clenched. I should have stormed up to her right then and there, demanded answers, caused a scene. But I didn't. I stood there, listening to my wife map out my destruction like it was a business strategy. And then, as if the universe wanted to twist the knife deeper, she laughed. A light, airy sound. "The vow renewal was actually perfect," she mused. "It'll make him look even more clueless when this all comes out. No judge will believe he didn't know about the house sale if we just recommitted to each other." She had used me. Our anniversary, our vows, it was all a setup. I must have made a noise because she suddenly went silent. I ducked back around the corner, pressing myself against the cool brick wall, my pulse hammering in my ears. I heard her heels clicking as she walked back to our table. I took a deep breath, ran cold water over my face, and forced my expression into something resembling normalcy. When I returned, she looked up and smiled at me. "Want to share the tiramisu?" she asked sweetly, as if she hadn't just gutted me alive. I ordered champagne instead. I needed time to think. By the time we got home, I had already decided. She had no idea what was coming. That night I lay next to Lillian, her steady breathing beside me, completely unaware that her world was about to come crashing down. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the soft rustling of the sheets as she shifted in her sleep. But my mind was racing. I felt like a man trapped in a nightmare, unable to wake up. I had never felt more alone. I should have confronted her right then and there, should have screamed the truth and forced her to admit everything. But I didn't. Instead, I lay there, pretending to sleep, waiting for her to drift off into her carefully constructed dream of a life that she thought was hers for the taking. The more I thought about it, the more disgusted I became. All these years, 20 years of building a life together, and she was willing to throw it all away for money and a new life in California. I wasn't just heartbroken, I was furious, but I had to be smart. Around 2 a.m., I quietly slipped out of bed. I couldn't let Lillian hear me, couldn't let her know what I was about to do. I gathered a few things, my passport, a few important documents, and some clothes, and shoved them into a duffel bag. I wasn't sure where I was going yet, but I needed to get out of that house. I walked downstairs, my feet barely making a sound on the hardwood floor. The house felt eerily quiet, the kind of silence that only comes when something is about to break. I reached the office in the back of the house. My father's old desk was still there, filled with papers, old books, and his tools. Some of the few things I'd kept after he died. I opened the safe. The combination clicked with a familiarity that now felt foreign. Inside there were some precious things I couldn't bear to lose. My mother's jewelry, some family heirlooms, and a few old documents from my parents' will. I took everything I could carry. The house was still technically Lillian's too, but I wasn't about to let her take what was mine. I locked the safe behind me, the metal door sliding into place with a satisfying click. I moved quickly. I had to be gone before she woke up. I called my friend Jack, a former colleague from my construction days. Jack knew me well, and he wasn't surprised when I told him what had happened. In fact, he was already preparing for something like this. Jack had his own complicated history with relationships, so he understood better than most. "Stay with me," Jack said over the phone. "You can figure this out. I've got a spare room. Don't stay there tonight." I didn't even hesitate. I told him I'd be there in an hour. I left the house, creeping out through the back door so that no one would see me leaving. The driveway was dark, and the only sound was the faint hum of the streetlights. The cool air hit me like a slap in the face, as if the universe was finally waking me up from the dream Lillian had cast over me. I wasn't sure where I was headed or what I was going to do when I got there, but I knew I had to get as far away from Lillian as possible. The next morning, things took a turn for the worse. Lillian woke up to an empty house, no sign of me. She sent me text after text, but I didn't respond. I needed time to think, time to process everything. I was sitting in Jack's living room, the adrenaline of the night wearing off, when I got the first call from Lillian. "Elliot, where are you? What's going on?" I didn't pick up. The second call came an hour later. This time, her voice was frantic. "I know something's wrong. Why are you doing this? You're scaring me." That's when I decided it was time to let her know. It had been a full 24 hours since I'd heard her talking about selling our house, taking the kids, and leaving me behind. I wasn't going to let her play the victim anymore. I texted her, "I heard everything at the restaurant. Don't try to spin this. I know what you've been planning. I'm not going to make it easy for you." A few seconds later, the phone rang again. This time I picked up. "You're not going to get away with this, Lillian," I said, my voice colder than I thought it would be. Get away with what? What are you talking about? She asked, pretending to be confused. You think I don't know about the house, the accounts, the divorce papers? You think I'm going to let you steal my inheritance, sell our home, and take the kids without a fight? She was silent for a moment. Then, in a voice I didn't recognize, she said, I didn't think you'd find out. I thought I could make this work, but now, I don't know what to do. You don't get to play the victim, Lillian, I snapped. You don't get to destroy our family and then cry when the consequences catch up to you. I hung up before she could respond. The next step was clear. I had to protect myself, and I had to protect my kids. I called Carla, a family lawyer who had been recommended by a colleague. Carla's no-nonsense approach made me feel like I was finally doing something proactive instead of just reacting to Lillian's manipulation. She told me to come in immediately. I'll help you freeze the accounts, she said. We can file an emergency motion for a temporary custody arrangement. We'll get the ball rolling. Carla's office was a stark contrast to the chaos in my head. The white walls, the neat stacks of paperwork, the quiet hum of the air conditioner. It almost felt like I had walked into a different world. When Carla handed me the papers, it was like I could breathe again. This is just the beginning, Elliot, she said. We'll get everything in order. You'll protect your kids, and when the time comes, you'll get your inheritance back. I left Carla's office with a new sense of purpose. Lillian might think she's got everything under control, but she was about to find out how wrong she was. The storm was just beginning, but I was ready. The days after I had collected all the evidence felt like a whirlwind of urgency and dread. I couldn't let Lillian know I was onto her plans. As much as it ate away at me to keep quiet, I knew this was the only way I could protect my family. The thought of losing everything my parents had worked so hard for, and worse, losing the trust and affection of my kids, it was unbearable. But I also knew that if I confronted her now, she would only use her charm and manipulation to twist everything back in her favor. So, I kept my distance. I spent my days quietly building my case, combing through every email, every bank statement, and every document I could get my hands on. Lillian had left a trail so wide that even a blind man couldn't miss it. But she had been so careful, so meticulous with her lies, that it made me wonder just how far she was willing to go to completely erase our history. All those years of marriage, of sacrifices, of building something together, it had all been a facade to her. But I couldn't let it consume me. I had to focus on the kids. Asher had always been distant, the kind of teenager who kept his feelings tucked away behind a wall of indifference. But lately, I could see the cracks in his armor. He was quieter, more withdrawn, and I knew it had nothing to do with the usual teenage angst. No, this was something deeper. Something about our family was unraveling, and he felt it. He had always been protective of Sophia, and seeing the two of them together as he tried to comfort her only made my resolve harder. Sophia, on the other hand, was lost in a sea of confusion. One moment she was crying in her room, the next she was avoiding me altogether, hiding behind her books and her headphones. She wasn't ready for this. None of us were. She still believed in the fairy tale of family, and now that image was crashing down around her. I could see the pain in her eyes when she looked at me. She was struggling to reconcile the mother she had always adored with the woman I was now telling her was a stranger. The truth was, I hadn't even prepared myself for what was about to unfold. I knew I was going to have to explain things to them soon, but how? How do you tell your children that everything they knew about their world was a lie? How do you tell them their mother, the woman they had trusted, had been plotting to take them away from me and ruin our lives? The weight of it all felt unbearable, but I couldn't let Lillian win. While I tried to keep things calm for the kids, I knew the real game was being played behind the scenes. Lillian had already started calling her lawyer, and I could feel the tension building as the days passed. It was only a matter of time before she tried to get ahead of me, manipulate the situation, and paint herself as the victim. She had always been good at that, twisting the narrative to make herself look like the martyr and me like the villain. But this time, she wouldn't get away with it. The lawyer I had hired, Carla, was already preparing for the battle. She was sharp, confident, and meticulous. The first time I met her, she told me, "This is going to get ugly, Elliot, but we have everything we need. Just let me handle it." Still, I couldn't stop the worry that gnawed at me every night. What would Lillian do when she found out I was onto her? What lengths would she go to in order to get what she wanted? I knew she wasn't above anything. In fact, I had a feeling her next move was going to be even worse than I expected. A few days after I froze the bank accounts and filed for the emergency motions, I was sitting in the car when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Lillian. "We need to talk. I don't know what you think is going on, but I swear, this is all just a misunderstanding. I'm still trying to make this work. You don't have to do this. You know I love you and the kids. Please don't tear our family apart. I stared at the message, almost laughing out of disbelief. It was as if nothing had changed, as if I hadn't just found out she was stealing from me, planning to leave me and destroy everything we had built together. I knew exactly what she was doing, trying to get me to back down, trying to appeal to my emotions, trying to make me feel guilty. But I couldn't let her. I couldn't afford to. I ignored the message, but it didn't stop there. She called me multiple times throughout the day, leaving voicemail after voicemail. "You're overreacting, Elliot. This isn't what you think. We can still work this out. Just come home. Please, I need you." I didn't answer. I knew this was the calm before the storm. She would try everything to convince me that I was wrong, to convince me to give up my fight, but I wasn't going to be fooled again. The worst part came the next day when I got home after work. As soon as I walked in, I could feel the tension in the house. Asher was sitting on the couch, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, and Sophia was standing by the window, staring out into the yard. They both turned when I walked in, but neither of them said anything. The silence between us was thick with unsaid words. "Hey, Dad," Asher said quietly, his voice strained. "Is Mom really leaving?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. It was time. I don't know yet, Asher," I replied, walking over and sitting down on the couch next to him. "There are some things going on right now, and your mom and I, well, we're not in a good place. But I need you both to know that I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you. We'll figure this out together." Sophia turned away from the window, her eyes wide with confusion. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why is she doing this, Dad? I don't want to leave. I don't want to go anywhere." I reached out and pulled her into a hug, feeling her small body tremble against mine. "You're not going anywhere, sweetheart. I promise you that." Asher stood up and walked to the kitchen, running his hands through his hair. "I don't get it. How could Mom do this to us? We were happy, right?" "We were, Asher," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "We were, but sometimes people change, and not always in the way you expect." He just shook his head, his eyes filled with anger and frustration. I don't know what to believe anymore. The next day I got a phone call that made my stomach drop. It was Marcus, the guy Lillian had been having an affair with. He'd contacted me before, trying to explain himself, but I hadn't listened. This time, however, was different. This time, he had information that could change everything. "I know you're probably angry at me, but I need you to hear me out," Marcus said, his voice low and anxious. "Lillian's been planning this for a long time. I thought I was helping her escape, but now I see I was just a pawn. I didn't know the full extent of what she was doing." I clenched my fists. "What are you talking about?" "I know she's been lying to you about her finances," he continued. "She's been funneling money into accounts, getting ready to sell the house and take the kids, but she told me she wasn't just doing it for herself. She's planning to use you as the scapegoat." My heart dropped into my stomach. "What do you mean?" "She's been telling people you were abusive, that you forced her to stay in the marriage," Marcus said quietly. "She's even got a story ready for when the divorce goes public. It's all part of the plan, Elliot. She's been setting this up for months." The gravity of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. She had already started spinning her narrative. If I didn't act soon, she could turn the kids against me, make me look like the villain in this whole mess. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I had to take control, even if it meant hurting the kids in the process. Lillian had already crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. As I hung up with Marcus, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about saving my marriage anymore. This was about saving my family. I had to stop her before she destroyed everything. The days after I confirmed everything with Marcus felt like a war zone. Every moment of peace I tried to grab felt like it was slipping through my fingers. Lillian had been preparing this for months, maybe even years, and I couldn't sit back and let her take everything. I had to act fast. The clock was ticking. Every minute that passed felt like a trap closing around me, one I wasn't ready to fall into. I started with what I could control, the kids. As much as I wanted to shield them from everything, I knew I couldn't. Asher, the older of the two, had begun pulling away in the past few weeks, his silence only confirming what I had suspected. He knew something was off. I couldn't let Lillian manipulate them further. I couldn't allow her to plant the seeds of doubt before I had a chance to show them the truth. But how do you explain to a teenager that his mother is plotting to take everything away? Or to a 14-year-old girl that the family she thought she knew is a lie? How could I shield them from this storm while preparing for what was coming? I reached out to Carla, my lawyer, that afternoon. I needed to start the legal battle, but I had to do it the right way. "Carla, I can't wait any longer," I said when she picked up. "We need to file the emergency motions. We need to make sure the house doesn't get sold, and I need to protect the kids. I won't let her take them." "Understood," Carla replied, the weight of the situation settling in her voice. We've got a solid case, Elliot. The evidence is there. I'll get the papers drafted, but you have to be prepared. Lillian's going to fight back. She's not going to let go without a full-scale war. I'm ready for it, I said, though the pit in my stomach told me I wasn't as ready as I hoped. The storm was coming, and I could already feel the winds picking up. I woke up the next morning, my mind already in overdrive. The kids needed stability. I had to keep them from getting caught in the middle of all this, but at the same time, they needed to know what was happening. Asher had been distant for weeks, so it wasn't surprising when he refused to talk much over breakfast. His eyes kept flicking over to Sophia, who was unusually quiet, her mind obviously elsewhere. She was always the more sensitive one, and I could see it. She was picking up on the tension, feeling the walls closing in around us. Everything's fine, kids, I said, trying to sound confident. It's just, Mom and I are going through some stuff, but it's nothing to worry about. Sophia didn't look convinced. Is everything okay, Dad? She asked, her voice filled with that innocence that made my heart ache. I hesitated. How could I say the right words without crushing them? I don't know yet, sweetheart, I finally said. But I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. Her eyes searched mine, trying to read me. Is Mom coming back? I could feel the walls of the house closing in on me. This wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't about Lillian's betrayal. It was about keeping my kids safe, keeping them intact, no matter how ugly this was about to get. After dropping the kids off at school, I headed straight to Carla's office. The papers were ready, the motion for emergency custody, the request to freeze the accounts, everything was set in motion. But I knew that wasn't the end of it. Lillian wouldn't go quietly. She would try everything she could to manipulate the situation to her advantage, and I wasn't ready for what would come next. Carla looked over the papers. It's time, she said, her voice tight with the gravity of the situation. Once we file this, we're in the thick of it. She'll have her lawyer fire back and it'll get ugly fast. Are you sure about this? More than ever, I said, my voice unwavering. Let's get it done. I signed the papers and Carla immediately filed the motion. My heart was pounding in my chest, the weight of the battle settling in. The next few hours were a blur. Phone calls, more paperwork, and constant communication with Carla as we prepped for the inevitable. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for, but I knew it was coming, and it wasn't going to be pretty. That evening, I got a call. It wasn't surprising. I had expected Lillian to make her move. What surprised me was how quickly she did it. I glanced at the caller ID. It was her. My stomach tightened. I answered with a calm I didn't quite feel. Lillian. Elliot, she said, her voice sweet but laced with something I couldn't quite identify. We need to talk. This isn't what you think it is. I took a deep breath. We've already talked, Lillian. I know exactly what's going on. There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then she came back, more controlled. You're making a mistake. The kids need me, Elliot. I'm the one who takes care of them, who gives them everything they need. You're not thinking straight. You're acting out of anger, and I'm just trying to make sure everything stays the way it was. I clenched my jaw. You've been planning this for months, Lillian. Don't act like you're the victim here. Her voice faltered, but she quickly regained composure. You're hurting them by doing this. You're going to make them hate you. You don't get to manipulate me anymore, I said, feeling the anger rise in my chest. I'm not the villain here. You are, and I'm not going to let you destroy everything we've built. There was a long pause. I could almost hear her trying to regain control of the situation. Finally, she spoke, her voice cold. You'll regret this, Elliot. You've made your choice, but you haven't seen what I'm capable of. The threat hung in the air, heavy and ominous, but I wasn't going to back down. I'm done being afraid of you, Lillian, I said. You've already shown your true colors. I'm doing what's best for our kids. If you can't see that, then you're already lost. The call ended abruptly, and I sat there for a long moment, staring at the phone. The storm was coming, and there was no way to avoid it now. The next few days passed in a blur of legal meetings, more paperwork, and constant tension in the house. I could feel Lillian's presence in everything, even though she wasn't physically there. The kids kept asking questions, and I kept answering them as best as I could, but I knew they were beginning to see things I wasn't ready for them to see. Asher had already withdrawn further, and Sophia was struggling to hold it together. I knew that as soon as Lillian made her next move, when the court papers hit and the fight truly began, nothing would ever be the same. I had no idea what she had planned next, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let her win. The clock was ticking, and I was ready for whatever came next. I knew the moment I filed the emergency motions that everything would change, but nothing could have prepared me for how quickly everything would spiral out of control. Lillian's retaliation came swiftly and without mercy. The media blitz, the accusations, the twisting of every event to make me look like the villain. It was a calculated move to manipulate everyone into believing her version of events. She reached out to friends, family, even some of our mutual acquaintances, painting me as an emotionally unstable father who was only out for revenge. She played the role of the heartbroken wife, abandoned by her husband in her time of need. It worked. The news spread quickly. Friends who had been on my side for years began to question me. Colleagues and even distant relatives were suddenly sending me texts and emails asking for clarification or expressing concern. They had bought into her version of the story, the one where I was a monster. The only thing I could do was focus on the truth of my relationship with my children, the truth of what Lillian had done behind closed doors. I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not when I knew that everything I had fought for was at risk. The hardest part came when Asher and Sophia started to make their own decisions. They were exposed to too much. Lillian's narrative was seeping into their thoughts, even if I hadn't wanted it to. They were old enough to understand the basics of what was going on, and with every passing day, they were asking more questions. It was Asher who confronted me first. He was no longer angry. Instead, he was silent, withdrawn. His eyes, once filled with defiance, were now clouded with doubt. "Dad," he said quietly, "is everything Mom said true? Did you really do all those things she said you did?" I stared at him, struggling to keep my emotions in check. He was hurting. He was scared. And I couldn't just shield him from this. He needed to hear the truth, even if it broke him. "No, Asher," I said firmly. "None of it is true. Your mom is twisting the facts to make me look like something I'm not. I've always been there for you. I've always been there for both of you, and I will continue to be." He sat down on the edge of the couch, his face hidden in his hands. "I don't know who to believe anymore, Dad." That was the moment I realized it wasn't just about the divorce or the fight over the house. It was about keeping my kids from falling into a world of manipulation. I couldn't let Lillian do this to them. I had to protect them from her. That night, Sophia came to me in tears. "Why is Mom doing this, Dad? Why is she telling everyone you're the bad guy?" I held her close, unsure of what to say. "Sweetheart, I don't know. I never thought I'd be in this position, but I'm not going to let her do this to us. I promise you that." The court hearing was the final act in this long and painful drama. When I walked into the courtroom, I felt no sense of victory, only the weight of what had happened. The judge had already been briefed on the motions, and Lillian's lawyer had made his case, painting me as the angry, unstable husband who was clearly unfit for custody. Lillian was seated beside her lawyer, her expression unreadable. Her lawyer's arguments were smooth, crafted to show me in the worst light. They accused me of emotional abuse, trying to take the kids from her without justification. But all I could do was sit there, calm, collected, while my entire life was being scrutinized. When it was my turn, I spoke plainly, stating the facts. I didn't need to play games. I didn't need to twist anything. I just needed to lay the truth out. I wasn't perfect, but I loved my kids. I would fight for them. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady, "I've spent my entire life trying to be a good father. I've been there for my children through everything, through the ups, the downs, the losses, and I'm not going to let anyone take them from me. Not now, not ever." Lillian's lawyer tried to discredit me, questioning my actions, my decisions, but it didn't matter. The judge saw through it all. After a tense moment of deliberation, the decision was final. The judge granted me primary custody of Asher and Sophia, stating that Lillian's actions were not in the best interest of the children. It was a rare moment of clarity amid the storm. Lillian was granted supervised visitation. The house would remain in my name, as it was part of my inheritance, and any financial assets she had tried to hide or move were ordered to be frozen. When the decision came through, I thought I would feel relief. Instead, I felt a heavy emptiness. There was no joy in winning a battle like this. Lillian was still a part of their lives, and she wasn't going away. But the kids were safe. They were with me, and I would make sure they understood the truth, even if it meant hurting them for a while. The weeks after the hearing were filled with tension. Lillian tried to make things harder, sending aggressive messages and trying to manipulate the kids into believing her version of events. But I kept my resolve. Asher started spending more time with me, talking to me about the things that were bothering him. Sophia began to open up again, though her confusion still lingered. Lillian moved out of the house and into a small apartment. The house was empty without her, but the silence was welcome. There were no more lies, no more pretending. But the damage had already been done. I couldn't change the past. All I could do was move forward, one day at a time. As I sit here now, looking at the life I've had to rebuild, I realize that everything has changed. The road ahead isn't easy, and I'll always carry the weight of what Lillian did, the betrayal, the lies. But I've also gained something I didn't have before: peace. I've learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stand your ground, even when the world around you seems to be falling apart. I've learned that family is worth fighting for, no matter the cost. And now, as I watch Asher and Sophia adjust to the new normal, I know that this is the only future that matters, the one where we heal, where we rebuild, and where we move forward together. The fight is over, and I've won.